I just did the video about common data breaches in the charity sector, and I thought I'd follow it up with one really just about how multi-agency working can be done well, because in one sense, all that video is about is how you can't do it. But this is kind of, what I'm not saying is that multi-agency work is not something that is helpful. And I'm certainly not saying that, that the data protection law stops multi-agency work from happening. It's just got to be done in a certain way. So as I say, that's what I'm going to try and tackle. And I think in order to kind of make sense of this, I just need to kind of give a bit of background about myself. So 10 years ago, maybe more than that now, I used to chair the rough sleeping multi-agency panel in Bedford. I kind of mentioned it in the last video. And, I was a real fanboy of the sector. I thought, the charity sector was brilliant. Loved Homelessness. I loved whatever the latest kind of, ending rough sleeping kind of thing was at the time. It was No Second Night Out. Various reasons I don't share those kind of views anymore. But whilst chairing the rough sleeper map, I had this kind of belief that the more agencies were involved in the case, the better outcome you'd have. So the idea was you have people who on paper tick various boxes, support needs or whatever. And I thought that, the more people in the room, the better the outcome for the person. And I'll explain why I was wrong about that. But before I get there, I'll explain a little bit about the actual legal side of the data protection sharing arrangements and stuff. So one of the partners in the room was a nurse who was attached to a GP surgery in town. Long history of kind of helping people who are homeless. Really good surgery, really cool people. And basically, she came to me in the meeting and said, "Look, Mike, you can't do this. You can't be sharing. I can't share my patient information in this setting because it's just too many people." And that kind of got me looking into the ICO website. So essentially what I then did was I read the ICO website and the guidance, because at the time there's some really good codes of guidance and stuff. They're still kind of putting them out at the moment following the GDPR and the Data Protection Act 2018. But essentially, I remember just how kind of concerned I was, because I realized pretty much everything I was doing was not legal. And at the time, I'd also kind of got to work with some really kind of good people in the sector, predominantly in the kind of social work and substance use sector. And I remember, again, just as a kind of same sort of time, we had this professionals meeting called for a very, very vulnerable lady. And one of the social workers there was like, what the hell are you guys doing having this meeting without her being there, without her being invited? Who are these people in the room? And, kind of really just gave us a bit of a dressing down. So lots of people think I'm a dick, but one thing I'm good at is when someone kind of comes to me with a challenge and says, Mike, this ain't right, I tend to kind of listen to them eventually. So yeah, I went away, read up on data protection law, and kind of went on this journey of kind of understanding why it was so bad. Because at the time I just thought, data protection, it stops you actually getting things done. But as I say, now I am, 180 degrees thinking the opposite direction. So I'm going to try and go through some bits and pieces that will hopefully be helpful for multi-agency working. Legal stuff, but also just kind of, I guess, principles that I believe in. And the first thing I'm going to say is that actually, I think there's a real myth in the sector that multi-agency working is the way forward. And I certainly believe now that actually, what's important is having the right professionals in the situation rather than having, the lots of them or kind of the ones that should be there on paper. Because often, particularly when you're working with people who are involved in lots of different sectors, they might feasibly have 10 different professionals who are paid to support them. But ultimately what I tend to find is that essentially the more people involved, the more people just kind of leave it to someone else. And there is some kind of psychology behind that. So there's this kind of bystander intervention idea, the idea that basically the more people who are involved in the situation, the more people will shrug and wait for someone else to do it. And there's a really kind of famous case of a lady who was murdered in New York between these two apartment buildings. And they worked out that about 50 different people had heard her screams for help, and they all thought someone else would deal with it, and no one did. And she died. It took about 45 minutes or something. You can read on that on Wikipedia. But yeah, so that's kind of the first thing I'd say, is that I think it's a real myth that actually having lots of people in the room is the answer. As I say, a small number of people, maybe only like 2 or 3, are often better able to actually get a good outcome for that individual. And just to kind of talk about the rough sleeping map in Bedford, going back a couple of years now, there's one really extraordinarily bad case where, this was a multi-agency meeting. It met every 2 weeks. I had a long list of clients. They went through about 25 people. And essentially, certainly from what we could see from the outside, we had 4 clients who had been discussed there. They actually didn't actually get the people housed. They didn't take basic steps. So one individual, which was particularly outrageous, could not have been any more vulnerable. The counsellor said she wasn't vulnerable, and essentially everyone in the room, in repeated meetings, no one challenged the counsellor. They just kind of shrugged and said, okay, well, she's not vulnerable, whilst also documenting the abuse she was suffering whilst homeless and all the rest of it. So I really do think that we need to be kind of just carefully consider who are the right people to have in the room. That's the first thing I'd say. The second thing is kind of more legal, or kind of coming from a more legal point of view, and that is to say that, as I said in that other video, you can't have this conveyor belt type meeting where you've got, you've got 20 or so individuals being discussed, and you bring in all the relevant organisations into the room and discuss all of them. Because first of all, there are going to be irrelevant organisations in the room, so you automatically breach the data minimisation principle, which means you're already kind of, you've broken the law already. And there's kind of various other things which I talked about, kind of actually what's important is that everyone's essentially doing it with the person's knowledge, with their consent. And that often isn't the case because, and again, just kind of talking about my own experience. So I worked in a voluntary sector organisation and wince at the kind of things I thought were good practice. These are kind of what I really wish I told myself, if I could talk to myself 17 years ago, this is the stuff I tell myself, my younger self. So actually, you what you're doing is really kind of doing more harm than good. And I remember, the first time I started working with this group of other decent professionals, and they invited this client along to a meeting, and this client was really difficult. I'd had bad experiences with them, being very aggressive and everything. And straight away I was like, really, you're going to have this guy in a room? What on earth? How is that going to help him at all? How is he going to contribute to the meeting? Just to kind of show you how ridiculous my kind of practice was. And obviously, actually when he was invited to the meeting, he was able, he was actually, he was included in that process, which is obviously something he should be included in. And he was completely constructive and completely was very decent, and through the whole process. And so there's a saying that comes out of South African civil rights stuff, which is basically nothing about us without us is for us. And I think that's something which, I did not understand in my years working for a religious charity. I thought I was the expert, and I thought that, we would just decide what was right for people and what was in their own best interest. And then we kind of tell them. And essentially that was still happening in Bedford up until a couple of years ago, something that I, tried to stop once I realized how stupid it was. But anyway, so basically what I'd say around multi-agency meeting is, don't have lots of people there for the sake of it. Just have the decent professionals who actually do what they say they're going to do. And secondly, just, in order for it to be legal, it's very difficult to have a legal meeting without that client being there. Or let me say that another way. If the client is in the meeting, then it's likely you're going to be following the law, because it's unlikely you're going to do something which they're going to object to. Because if you did, they'd object to it and they'd kind of cause a fuss, and rightly so. So I think, when you're approaching multi-agency work, or, whatever you're doing, so you might be working with someone who, as I say, ticks different boxes, and so is being dealt with by different sectors and different professions, as you say to them, hey, you've got some pretty complicated situation going on here. Shall we arrange a meeting, get you together with the professionals you want to be there, so we can work out what we can do and what you want to do, and kind of choose how we're actually going to get through this situation. And most people, given that kind of question, will say, yeah, that'd be really helpful actually. And again, from the start, you're putting them in control of how their data has been used and what support they get, which is the number one thing. I'm going to go off on some tangents. I'm sorry about this video. So I work as a painter and decorator in my spare time, well, my other time, because I can't do this work full time. It's just too much, too hard, basically. But I was chatting to a builder about it, because we were working in a hostel, and it was interesting. I was kind of, once he started talking about the kind of work, I was straight away just, kind of telling him what I thought about it. And it was interesting how quickly he understood, as a builder with no kind of, direct interaction with the sector. He kind of said, well, so what you're saying, it's about, people having, kind of control over what's going on, kind of autonomy. And I was like, yeah, bang on. It's a shame that the sector doesn't realize that. So if you're approaching the point of view of, saying, to a client, we are going to maximize the amount of autonomy you have over your situation. And let's face it, sometimes the number of options available to someone aren't great, and there's nothing you do about that. But if you maximize the amount of choice and control they have over that, you're going to get a better outcome. So, again, if you're going to do multi-agency work, from the start, you need to say to the person, do you want us to get, a few professionals together kind of talk about how we get through this. And secondly, who do you want to be in the room? Because they might say, actually, do you know what? I hate my probation officer. I don't want them to be in the room. Thanks very much. And you're like, yeah, fair enough. Okay, cool. We won't have them. And so you can kind of put them in that position to actually say who, you know, they can say what they think. Because just going back to reiterate it, they are the expert, not the professional. The professional's job is to basically maximize the choices available to the person. That's it. You know, the person knows what's best for them. So you do that, you know, and what this means is it is more time consuming in the short term, because rather than having a 2-hour meeting where you discuss 20 clients, you're having a meeting which might be 2 hours long and might take longer to actually organize because you've got to worry about diaries and stuff, but you bring people together, the person's there, and you just need to bear in mind that it is often very terrifying for people to be in that kind of setting. So you want to make sure they are prepped as to what it's going to look like. You know, you might be able to kind of get some freedom with what venue you use. So it might be they say, well, do you know what? I know a, you know, kind of cafe where there's a little annex, we can kind of go privately and talk about it. And that would be more comfortable for me, in which case, well, okay, let's see what we can do about that and see if we can make it happen. But that's ultimately what you would do. So you want to have a small meeting, the individual's there, you are constantly asking a person, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? What do you need? What's helpful? What's not helpful? And you can then use the different professionals in the room to kind of put that plan into practice, because you know, lots of different professionals will bring a different thing to it. We would not be able to do what we did without having really good relationships with some key professionals, ranging from medics when we need like evidence about priority need or something, social workers, probation officers, and so on, just to kind of make it all kind of fit together. But that's kind of, I'm trying to think, that's probably all I want to say at this point. So as I say, I'm not saying that multi-agency working is bad, but I think the way the sector does it is often really bad, illegal and really bad, really stupid and really kind of self-defeating. Because as I say, even with if you look at the rough sleeper map as an example, even if it wasn't breaking various laws in various ways, you know, the best you're going to come up with is basically have a dozen or so professionals saying, okay, yeah, Joe Bloggs has got alcohol problems and mental health problems, so he needs to go to the alcohol use service and the mental health service before we're going to house him, or, you know, he needs to go to this hostel because, you know, they can accept him with his drinking. And then tell him after the meeting, hey, Joe, we had a meeting about you, you know, you weren't invited. You didn't know who was there. You didn't know how we use your data, but we just decided that you need to go to hostel X because that's what we thought and we're the experts. So, you know, you need to do what we say. That's a terrible way of working, really stupid. And I say it as someone who used to work that way. So I am having to dig, but I'm also kind of just recognizing that that's the way a lot of the sector works, and that's kind of how you learn to do it in a lot of different situations. So it's only because I work with some really cool professionals that I actually kind of gave my head a wobble and worked that stuff out and looked to do it differently. So yeah, so from a legal point of view, I'm just trying to work out if there's anything else I didn't cover. So when you're working with someone anyway, they need to be informed about how their data is going to be used, who it's going to be shared with, how long it's going to be stored for, what their rights are, you know, the right to correction. It might be that a professional said something that's not true. They need to know that they can write to that organisation and say, oi, correct my records, please. So there's lots of things that you need to do. We call it a privacy notice. It needs to be given in paper. So this is just, again, a little bit of law that you might not be aware of. When you start working with someone, the clock starts ticking. You've got 30 days, or let me say that again. As soon as you start processing someone's personal data, so that might be that you received a referral and you haven't even met them yet, you've got 30 days to give them a paper copy of your privacy notice, and it needs to be written in layman's terms, and it says who we are, you know, what we do, how we use your data, what are the different lawful bases we're going to use, and it's primarily going to be consent. And I will say a bit more about this actually in a sec. But that needs to be so, and so in you know, legally, every single organisation in those meetings need to have given them a paper copy of their privacy notice, because every organisation will use it differently, use their data differently, and they need to be made aware of that. And if people were, you know, if organisations were really, you know, kind of proactive, they may well kind of agree on, you know, the same privacy notice, because the law's the same. You know, organisations could basically streamline it and say, right, you know, we're going to use the same privacy notice because we're using the data in the same way, and kind of tweak it here and there, but give everyone that opportunity to understand how their data is going to be used.